Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Marshal Kay, Global Director, Retail Transformation Services for Avery Dennison Smartrac, who takes us through the retail business case for RFID, from super accurate inventory to loss prevention, seamless self-checkout, and more, and what it takes to break through with this robust process and technology solution. Let's listen in now. Marshal, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, my friend. How are you?
I'm great today. How are you, Michael?
Fantastic. Listen, you and I have known each other for a bunch of years, but it's the first time I've got you on the mic, so thanks for joining me. Where am I finding you today?
I'm in beautiful Toronto.
Beautiful.
Today, which I call home.
Love it. Well, that's great. And you do a fair bit of traveling, right? We were talking off mic that you're on an airplane every now and then, and you've got a North American remit or a global remit. Is that fair?
Yes, my role is global. I have the privilege of working with retail executives around the world. Basically, I help them make good use of RFID and other smart label technology. So I get to work with all sorts of companies of different shapes and sizes across multiple consumer goods categories.
And have you always been I don't know if I describe you as a technologist, but how would you describe yourself and how did you get there?
Great question. So I'm a management consultant. I have been for over 20 years, and my focus has been on retail with a specific subspecialty in something called RFID, which stands for radio frequency identification. It's a form of smart label technology. But I actually began my career as a lawyer here in Canada with a focus on commercial litigation. But since I wanted to go deeper into the business world, I decided to take a pause, go back to school, and then become a management consultant.
Wow, I had no idea. But see, you know somebody a long time, but until you get them on the mic in a podcast, the things you learn, right?
Absolutely.
So what do you do for a living today? Who do you work for? And you've talked about, I know you as, when I think of you, I think of RFID, so your branding is kind of complete, that's for sure. But who do you work for today and what do you do?
I work for Avery Dennison. We're a $9 billion material science and technology company. We're the market leader in smart label technology that connects the digital world and the physical world. And I head up a team called Retail Transformation Services that is a consulting capability that is made available to clients of Avery Dennison that are truly interested in transforming their retail businesses.
All right, well, let's jump in. So let's talk about RFID. So 4 letters that, when I talk to retailers, RFID is not a new technology. I'm sure it gets better and better all the time. But, for the listeners who may not be familiar, give us a non-technical overview, if you would, of RFID and where it sits in its evolution.
You can think of RFID as a smart label that allows you to know where an item is. It's a serialized technology, so it allows you to know that you have an item, where it is. It's also able to let you know where the item has been. So for retailers, it helps them understand exactly what's sitting in the store, in the 4 walls of the store, in a way that no other technology has ever allowed them to do. And it's something that retailers have wanted this capability for over 100 years, if not longer. It also gives retailers, for the first time, a distinct view of exactly what is sitting on their sales floor compared to what is sitting in their stock rooms and in what quantities. But it's also a technology that speeds up checkout, because you have the ability to place items down on a counter where you have a reader and they can be read automatically. And this isn't just for self-checkout, even though there's been a lot of attention in recent years about self-checkout. Yes, it speeds up self-checkout. So if you go to Uniqlo, for example, a great retailer, you place all the items in a kiosk and they automatically read. Well, that's RFID at work. But the same magic can happen at a regular checkout till as well. And RFID also can detect the movement of items between one room and another. So let's say between the stock room of a store and the sales floor of a store. That's a movement that can be detected by RFID, or if you actually want to have a more intelligent form of exit reader at the front doorway of a store to monitor and protect against theft and to prove theft. So I've given you a bunch of retail use cases, but really the journey starts at factory, because there's a lot of inaccuracy that happens when items get packed. And so RFID gives consumer goods companies and retailers the ability to understand a product's journey and confirm its presence at different points along the value chain. So that might have been more depth than you were looking for. But
no, it's a good intro. I mean, let's actually, I want to go a little bit deeper, because on the one hand, it is, and I'm holding one in my hand. I was at Decathlon store and did a self checkout, so I got their label. It's baked into their label. Literally last week, so I happen to have one in my hand for inspiration for our conversation. So on the one hand, it's a skinny label. The consumer probably doesn't even see it exists unless they undo the label. But on the other hand, or not on the other hand, but there's a lot of technology in the store that needs to be present to read these labels. Talk about that, because I feel like that has been one of the. I get it that the labels are getting less expensive, but the technology to do all those wonderful things with it still is pretty comprehensive. Talk about that part of it for a bit.
Well, to be frank, I really don't agree with that assessment, Michael, and here's why. I mean, you basically need Wi-Fi in your stores. You don't need a lot of technology. You have cloud software solutions that basically allow any retailer, big or small, to take inventory. You need a handheld device that looks much like a barcode reader. These things are inexpensive. And the cost, by the way, for RFID, both for these smart labels and for the devices, they've been more than cheap enough for well over a decade. Right. And more than good enough. Give
us a sense of what because I've heard that before, and I've heard from retailers that like you could probably find, what is it, 4 cents or a nickel or whatever they are. You tell me. You can find that. It's all the other stuff that they're getting their heads around. What is the cost of an average cost of a label these days for averages?
Well, you know what? But based on important rules like competition law, I can't really get into the specifics of pricing. But I'll simply say that the numbers that you've mentioned are numbers that I often hear.
They're in the ballpark. They're ballparky.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. The other thing, too, is when you compare that with the value generated by these smart labels. And I work with retail executive teams, and I'm often asked to help with the business case for proceeding with these investments. The value dwarfs the cost. And you're looking at payback periods that can be under 6 months in many instances, or it can be 12 months or whatever. But the other thing, too, is think of it this way. This is a necessary modernization. And you have retailers that, frankly, have neglected to make this modernization that are paying the price for it, even though it's sometimes subtle. It's not a headline. But back to your central point, though, Michael, that, for some on the outside looking in, it might appear like there's a lot more that you need to do beyond just having these smart labels applied to your items upstream of the store. And as I was mentioning, if you've got a handheld reader, those things, they cost in the hundreds of dollars, not in the thousands of dollars. Now, obviously, if you want the best of them, you may spend more than $1,000.
Sure.
But that's a small price to pay. You're basically wasting this money in the form of inefficiency in inventory that isn't productive, and in the form of extra store labor for processes that aren't nearly as efficient as possible, and extra transportation costs too. Your e-com, for example, if you take a look at the number of orders that get sent to a store for fulfillment that get declined because the store couldn't find what headquarters thought was in the store, you're wasting a lot of money each and every year, and that money could and should be repurposed. And frankly, you have retailers that could have been using RFID 10 years ago, 13 years ago, that haven't, and they experience the consequences of it. I mean, you have a retailer like Lululemon, or you mentioned Decathlon, both examples of great retailers who have used RFID very, very well for well over a decade.
Now they're also great examples of mono brands, right? So they make their, like, whether it's Uniqlo or Decathlon or Lululemon, they're making their own products, so they have a different control, and their supply chain looks very different than a department store with, you know, or a grocery store with hundreds of vendors. Where are we with that? I mean, the business case, or even on its surface as you describe it, it's like, sounds wonderful. The challenge, it seems, is alignment with all the vendors. Talk about where the industry is with that.
Got it. That's a great question. I also think it's really important to distinguish between different types of retail. And what I mean by that is that, you know, you can look at DIY retailers like Home Depot or Lowe's, for example, where RFID can be used, and you can expect interesting things to be happening over the next couple of years there. But you compare that with a supermarket, or you compare that with a department store, or a place like Dick's Sporting Goods, a multi-brand sporting goods retailer. Sure. Each are very different environments. So as you know, RFID took root most quickly in the worlds of apparel and footwear. And soft goods.
Lots of SKUs, lots of formats, lots of stuff moving around. Yeah.
Well, you also look at the form factor of and the nature of the product itself. RFID has moved into a huge range of general merchandise, all sorts of consumer goods, the home goods category, beyond what's called soft home, like towels, linens, things of that nature. Basically everything else in the home goods category, whether it's for the kitchen, whether it's for the bathroom, or other parts of the home. And then you look at lawn and garden, things like cooking fuel. You look at areas like automotive, even motor oil can be tagged. You look at personal electronics and related accessories, all sorts of stuff.
The tagging seems the easy part. I guess it's you know what? I guess let me rephrase the question. What holds retailers back? Is it the fact that they want every item from every vendor on RFID, or then you've got a mix of systems in the store? What are the challenges that you run up against when talking about broader RFID implementation?
It's a great question. There's a lack of awareness. I mean, and just a bunch of misperceptions. You know, just to finish and close the loop on that last point. We basically have gotten to a point where if you're a retailer, if you sell it, we can tag it. Sure. They basically, you know, I say we as an industry basically have designed intelligent labels for virtually every consumer good that's out there. Also, there's been a misperception that an item needs to be above a certain price point for it to be economically viable. Now, obviously, when I say price point, I mean, you know, even 25 cents is a price point. But to clarify, people in the past used to think, an item used to need to cost more than $15 or $10 in order for it to make sense to put on a smart label that adds extra pennies to the cost of the item. And the benchmark pricing that you mentioned before is, like I said, something that's quite common. So the reality is we have lots of items that sell for under $4, under $3 that today get smart labels. And you have to remember, it's a combination of use cases that drive the value. Not only does it dramatically increase inventory accuracy, it also increases the visibility into the inventory within the four walls of the store, and also the findability. And then also it speeds up checkout. And then also it helps in reducing theft and controlling theft. So it does a bunch of different things. And as you start to layer in use cases, the price point of the merchandise that can support having a smart tag gets really, really, really super low. Sure. And, you know, Michael, something that we haven't talked about is the importance of data quality. There's so much attention placed on AI, and for good reason, for lots of good reasons. And yet, rarely do you have people talk about the importance of data quality as it relates to inventory data.
What do they say? Garbage in, garbage out. That's that
exactly
old saying,
it.
Right?
Yeah. I had the privilege of interviewing the chief digital officer of Decathlon, the retailer you mentioned before. This was last year in Barcelona at Shop Talk Europe. And we talked about that point precisely. And he emphasized the high degree of detail that company places on data quality before that data gets the benefit of the data science investments that Decathlon has made. And it's precisely that. We talked about what I call the Leaning Tower of Pisa, that if your company is resting on a foundation of squishy data, in this case, squishy inventory data, you can invest and invest and invest, but basically the whole tower will start to lean. So you can think of it in different ways. I sometimes talk about retail osteoporosis. I sometimes talk about osteoporosis is one of them, and I sometimes talk about carbon monoxide leak, meaning that for certain types of retailers, and I think in particular the apparel retailers, even though the RFID is applicable to so many types of retail businesses, but for apparel retailers in particular, if you're operating without RFID, and specialty apparel retailers in particular, you've got a problem on your hands, a real one. You've got competitors of yours, direct competitors who have had the benefit of this technology for many years, and you don't. And you're doing more and more things that basically our mutual friend Steve Dennis talks about harmonized retail, the harmonization of online and brick and mortar. And harmonized retail requires you to have a better and more accurate view of exactly what inventory you have in each of your stores than ever before, and your ability to find it quickly and efficiently. So back to this notion of a carbon monoxide leak. You've got a dangerous problem on your hands, and you don't know you've got a problem, and then one day you're not going to be awake. And it'll be too late.
Well, listen, there must be examples, and I've seen you talk about whether it's Macy's or I've read other large enterprises who are making inroads in, because it feels like it has to be a partnership between the, again, the mono brands aside, where they own the, front to back of the supply chain for the retailers who sell a wide variety of goods with thousands of vendors. It feels like there needs to be a partnership there. Is that where retailers are winning? They kind of say, listen, if you're going to be a vendor for us, do you see a day, let me rephrase, do you see a day when big retailers say, listen, if you're going to be a vendor for us, we're all in on RFID for all the reasons you've described. We don't want to die in our sleep. You've got to put RFID tags on your product. Are we in that direction? What's your assessment?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, when it comes to department stores, and I realize that that's a sector that has some systemic challenges, but basically, over the last decade, we've been well into that progression. It started with Macy's about 10 years ago, and several other North American department store retailers have communicated this requirement to their vendor base. But then I'll ask you, Michael, how much do you know about the Walmart RFID program? And obviously, I won't share any information that's confidential. I can't. But how much do you know about that program?
Not much. I know that they're working on it, but that's one of the things, one of my questions for you is, since you would know a lot about it, tell me all about it.
So, like I said, there is public information about the Walmart program, and Walmart, like many other multi-brand retailers, has communicated to certain vendors that it is a requirement to put intelligent RFID labels on merchandise in several consumer goods categories. And this isn't new. This is certainly not new. And a good source of information would be on the website of RFID Journal. They have an excellent event called RFID Journal Live. Okay. And that would be a great place for your listeners to get more information.
Yeah. You send me the links, and I'll put it in the show notes. So there you go. We'll connect that dot for the listeners.
Okay. But to your point, the general point, Michael, is this common in general merchandise retail environments that aren't mono-brand, that involve multiple brands?
Mm-hmm.
This has been for many years. The Tesco program has been around for a long time. Target, with many of its vendors, this has been the case for quite some time, and this is public information.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Walmart program. And it's really important too, because think about what I said earlier about price points.
Mm-hmm.
People used to think, oh, okay, well, this will first start with retailers whose merchandise carries very high price points, and it'll gradually trickle its way down to the more value-oriented sectors of retail. And that's not the case at all. Look at the price points and the excellent value at retailers like Walmart and Tesco and Target, et cetera.
Sure.
And this has become common.
Let's talk about, we've been talking about very big brands. So one of the questions I like to ask folks like yourself is this technology the purview of only the biggest? Can the small to mid-size retailers kind of play and get all those wonderful efficiencies that you're talking about with RFID? So, is there such a thing as, RFID in a box? I've got a small amount of SKUs and I'm going to put it on myself kind of thing as a small or even a mid-sized retailer. Does that make any sense? Are you seeing any of that in the market?
Well, it always goes back to the central question of what are the business problems you're looking for RFID to solve for you? Because there are instances where it could make sense for a company to put the labels on themselves, even in the store, although typically that is not where you want to be putting the labels on.
Sure.
But
as a small retailer, you don't really have you're sourcing in dozens. You don't really have the wherewithal or even the buying power to mandate or ask even for, a wide variety of these things. Like if you think about your small, maybe your mids, but I don't know. I'm just kind of, that RFID in a box, get all the benefits you've described earlier in the podcast, the data integrity, the movement, one swipe and I know exactly what's in the store. Are you seeing it move downwards in terms of that size of retail?
Absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not terribly complicated or expensive. You have a wide range of solutions available. You have a wide range of choices when it comes to how you would do it, who you would do it with, and these are cloud-based solutions as well. You don't need to have a tremendous amount of expertise to do this, and so what many retailers are finding is that even if they hadn't been thinking about RFID, a certain percentage of their merchandise is already coming in with RFID tags because those branded suppliers are putting these tags on either for themselves or for their own benefit.
That's interesting.
If I can just follow up for a moment, there's benefit from factory to store in the entire value chain, and many global consumer brands have their own store networks and also do a lot of e-com business directly to consumers as well. So you have market leaders like Adidas and Nike who made the decision to move forward with RFID for their own purposes before even being required, or require is a strong word. I'll call it having it strongly suggested to them by some of their major retail trading partners.
Strongly requested. Let's talk about, let's dig in a little bit in the time we have left together. Let's dig in a little bit to the idea of RFID and LP. So loss prevention. So you did a great session at the NRF, big show on this. And I wanted to just hone in this for a little bit because, of course, it's a hot button within retailers. So as I see RFID, or as I see loss prevention, I see it or shrink, I see it in two ways. One is inventory integrity. So you've clearly addressed you could get better inventory integrity with RFID, like just stuff moving around. On the other side of LP, people walking out the store stealing goods, what role can RFID play over and above, you're tagged with a tag on it that sends an alarm? Like, tell me about the practical use of RFID, not just in inventory integrity, but in that kind of loss prevention scenario.
Right. Great question. And of course, as you know, there's an important connection between loss and inventory accuracy and inventory integrity. A good way of thinking of it is this, that of course the end goal and the ultimate goal is ultimately to prevent theft from happening in the first place. But in the absence of that, if only the thief were nice enough to leave a note before leaving the store, itemizing all the things that they're taking with them, 10 out of 10 retailers would love to have that visibility. And RFID, if used at the exits, gives that ability. It's a tremendous leap forward compared to the older generation of technology that isn't serialized and doesn't give that visibility. So, for example, you might get a beep, but you don't know if 8 things have left the store or 1 thing, and you don't know what those items are as well. So that's
and how does the retailer tell the difference? I guess, is it in the system between an item that is walking out the store because someone purchased it and someone is stealing it? Is there a check that this item has been checked out?
Yes.
Ah, interesting.
Yes. So you have the ability to, because this is serialized, to identify whether an item has been purchased or not. You have that ability. But this is important, Michael. RFID changes the game for loss protection professionals and practitioners in a bunch of different ways. It isn't contingent on having smart exits at all of at all of your doorways.
You don't need that hardware, right? Is it like a geo-fenced kind of thing?
Well, you do need hardware. Okay. You do need hardware, but there's so many different parts to the story. So also keep in mind that that retailers want visibility over what they have in their stores. And typically once a year or sometimes twice a year, they will do a full count of their inventory. They do that because their auditors require it, but they then take that view and then try to use it to some degree to better inform their loss prevention strategies and tactics. The thought of doing that once a year count 12 times a year or 24 times a year never really is practical for them because of the great expense and because those laborious counts aren't 100% accurate anyways. And of course, you can think of the revolt of all the frontline staff if they had to stay late 12 or 24 times a year. With RFID, you get that visibility. That's one part of it. But then all RFID, because it's serialized, gives you so much more information. It gives you information about what's going off the grid in your stores much more frequently. It gives you information about who is involved in perpetrating those thefts. It helps you prove theft. It helps you package up cases for law enforcement. It helps you recover stolen merchandise. You even have many instances where stolen goods are found in a warehouse and law enforcement doesn't know who they belong to. Let's say it's Nike product. They don't know which retailer owns that Nike product. Now RFID is giving retailers and law enforcement the ability to connect those dots. And also when you think about connecting the dots, it allows law enforcement and retailers to connect the dots and connect what otherwise would have been viewed as very discrete theft incidents and instead tie those together to various individuals. So it's not impossible to bust an organized retail crime gang without RFID. RFID just makes it that much easier and that much more effective.
What do you see for the future? You've got a unique perch from your vantage point globally to the best-in-class RFID solutions. What's in your last kind of 30 seconds, what do you see for the future? Like, it's already a pretty cool technology. What's on the drawing board or in the labs?
Yeah, well, I think that you will continue to see more being written about RFID. I think that there will be great interest in the next wave of solutions that allow for the store to literally take its own inventory, and that involves having readers mounted overhead. There are some solutions in the marketplace. They're very interesting, and I think you will see more attention about that. My hope, Michael, is that the executive teams of more retailers will become even more aware of how easy it is for their companies to be using RFID, and for it to become even more of a priority than it might currently be. Now, that's not to say that there aren't many retail companies and consumer goods companies that have this as a high priority, but I believe you're going to see more, especially in the soft goods space. But what's exciting is also in general merchandise categories too. I think about drugstores. I think about other environments like that. There's so many opportunities to put this to good use.
Well, Marshall, you're quite an evangelist and an expert, certainly in RFID. So it's great to have you on the mic because it is certainly a topic of discussion, and it's long overdue that you and I have a chat. And I don't think it'll be the last time because it's evolving pretty quick. But for now, I wanted to thank you for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. It was a great discussion, and be sure and send over some links to where folks can go to learn more. And where can they get in touch and learn more about RFID? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, LinkedIn is a great way. I would also say marshal.kay@averydennison.com is a terrific way as well. And to learn more, I would highly encourage people to come to the Avery Dennison website and put RFID into the search field, and you'll get some great information. Those are all great ways, and we're always happy to be teaching our clients and others about the many ways to put smart label technology to great use.
And you said you'll be wandering around Shop Talk for any of the listeners heading to Shop Talk, and you go to conferences so they can look you up there, but connect with you on LinkedIn is a great place to start. Well, like I said, Marshall, thanks so much for joining me on the mic. Great discussion, and look forward to keeping in touch and wish you continued success.
Thanks so much. Same to you, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global eCommerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker, Rethink Retail 2023 Global Top Retail Influencer. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.